welcome to the Alex Spicer Show. I'm really excited. Today I have a special guest. I have Julie Rose from BYU Broadcasting. She is the host of the show Top of Mind. Now, Julie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you're from and how you got started into broadcasting, into being a journalist?
Sure. I'm actually from Provo. I grew up here and went to BYU and studied public relations. Because I thought that it would be less stressful than journalism and that I'd make more money, both of which were maybe true. But after about 10 years doing PR in California, in the tech industry, and then for nonprofits in Salt Lake City, I realized that I had missed my calling and that radio was where I really wanted to be. And so it started off as a hobby, and then I ended up volunteering and then working for a small public radio station in Salt Lake City. And I spent about 5 years there as their reporter, covering local politics, covering state capitol issues in Utah. And then I moved to North Carolina and spent 6 years reporting for a large public radio station in Charlotte, North Carolina, and also at that time doing a lot of the political and social and environmental reporting that NPR needed out of that region. They didn't have somebody on the ground in North and South Carolina, and so I became one of their go-to people for that kind of reporting. So, which I loved, and it was great. And then a couple of years ago, I came back to Utah to be closer to family, to help out with some family stuff, and BYU Radio had started up while I was gone. And so it was really a pleasant surprise to discover that there was this great station building something here at BYU Broadcasting with a lot of great professionals and really hardworking student employees. And so I started hosting this daily live news interview show, which is basically what we do on Top of Mind. We're live every day for 2 hours in the afternoon, Monday through Friday, and we talk to experts on just about anything you can imagine. We're the newsiest show, if I could call it that, on BYU Radio. And BYU Radio has everything from live sports broadcasts of Cougar football and basketball and soccer, which a lot of people that's one of the most popular things on BYU Radio. Also has lifestyle programming, and there's even a live music show that we do on BYU Radio, a travel show. So there's a literacy and reading show, so just a wide variety. And it's been really fun for the last 2.5 years, create this show from scratch and really be able to kind of build up both a following and some respect from the people who participate in our show, and really feel like it's just so refreshing to them to be able to spend 20 minutes talking about their life's work instead of spend 3 minutes and have one soundbite taken out of that. So, and that's what I love about it too, is to be able to add more context to all of the headlines that you see every day.
Absolutely. Actually, that's what attracted me to your show. So I had a friend, I don't know if you know him, his name is Kevin Santiago.
Sure.
And he said, you should listen to Julie Rose. And so I started listening, and I thought, wow, she actually has discussions with people, like actual discussions. And it's not like the whole soundbite, what can sound good, what can be sensational to the audience, but like actual in-depth knowledge. And I thought that was very respectable. I think that's what's really missing in journalism. And we're going that route in this conversation, but I really do feel like what is missing is that people don't have real conversations anymore. It's more about some sort of debate, about making some sort of big point, and less about having a real communication, real understanding take place. Would you say that because journalism, let me just ask you, do you agree with that? Do you agree that maybe journalism is a little bit more that way now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that because there are so many choices, certainly when you look at the 5 o'clock news, 6 o'clock news, 10 o'clock news on your local station has always been short format. I mean, if you're a television news reporter, you get 60 seconds to tell your story that you've worked on all day long, which is hard enough for me to even answer one question in 60 seconds, let alone, figure out how to communicate a whole story. And if you think about, they might occasionally get some sort of special report that's going to give them 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Yeah.
It's just very, and it's built around, it's a 30 minute, news cycle, news broadcast, and they've got to work in all of the advertising that pays for all of that.
Yeah.
And they're trying to basically cover your whole day's news in 30 minutes. And so that tends to bias the kinds of stories that they can tackle. I mean, it's a lot easier to tell the story of a car crash in 60 seconds than it is to tell the nuances of the latest healthcare bill that the Republicans are considering. It's a lot easier to talk about how some elected official criticized some other elected official on Twitter and caused a little spat. That's a lot easier to communicate in 60 seconds than, here are the nuances of this political stance and why this should matter to voters, right? So it's always, especially in television, it's always had just kind of short format. And then you think about how cable news has kind of expanded where, there's no good reason why they can't do what you do and what I do on cable news. And sometimes they do, but mostly you see that on like PBS, where you will see a 30-minute conversation with a single guest.
Absolutely.
They have plenty of airtime on CNN. They could be having expansive conversations, but clearly there is something about the shorter, more antagonistic, bring 6 people on and have them kind of argue that is working for them and other stations like Fox and MSNBC. And so I guess what I'm saying is that it's not just that journalists are doing this because they get kicks from it, like that this is what they want to do. I know a lot of journalists and reporters who bemoan the fact that they can't do what I get to do, which is spend 20 minutes to an hour really chewing on a topic. So it's not all journalism's fault. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's definitely the other factors, like you said, the advertising spots, the time limits and constraints. I'm curious. So with the way journalism has gone, even though journalists don't necessarily want to go that way, would you say that has had a impact on the way people act civilly towards each other? Would you say that journalism has contributed to a society that is more about competing with each other? Or would you say that society has been the one driving journalism towards that direction?
Chicken or egg kind of a thing?
Yeah.
I don't know. I would never want to say that journalists have made the world less civil. I think there also is something that people don't realize, which is that there's a difference between punditry and journalism. So if you're the host of a show on a cable news channel and you voice your opinion all the time about issues and you bring people on and argue with them about their opinion and whether your opinion is better than theirs, you're not doing journalism, you're doing punditry. And that is different than doing a report that gets published in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post. Journalists are there to find the story, report the story, and we can talk about objectivity, which is another ball of wax if you want, but that's a very different thing from a lot of what people, just because it's on TV and it's on a news channel doesn't mean it's journalism. There's an awful lot of very uncivil conversation that's taking place, and I think that most of the time that is not journalists calling people names. It is pundits, people who are provocateurs, who are arguing for the sake of arguing. And yes, that has absolutely, you can turn on, if your kids can turn on the TV and they can see anyone from the President of the United States to the White House spokesperson to the local, talk show host in your community calling people names, you learn that lesson.
Yeah.
It's not that people haven't always been rude and unkind to each other. I think we just have a lot more ways to see it. Like, we didn't used to have Twitter where people could get on and call each other names in public in that way. You used to have to go down on the street corner and call somebody a name, or stand up at your local PTA meeting and get into some sort of spat. And that, it just wasn't quite so public. And then we just and we didn't have quite so many news outlets that could obsess about it. And you have to recognize that there is there is always going to be bias. Like, just because I choose to, when I choose to quote, to bring one person on instead of another person, that is a decision that I make as a journalist. When I choose to quote one person or use their quote and then use a different quote from somebody else, I am making a decision that biases what you're going to perceive in that story.
There's so much going on, and there's so many different voices out there. You talk about objectivity, but yet there's still a bias. Where do you feel like, if we all come up from a place of bias, right? So essentially objectivity in that sense doesn't exist. What is objectivity to you then? Like, how does someone act objectively despite the bias they come from?
Objectivity doesn't mean much to me, honestly.
No?
I mean, I don't...
I'm so glad you said that. No, seriously, I'm so glad you said that, because so many... So I took a journalism class. I think... I didn't tell you. So one of my majors at one point was communications, and all we talked about for like over several weeks was objectivity. And I just felt like this is just like a dead horse, and we're hacking it to death. And
yeah,
there's no point to it, because
I
it doesn't exist.
I think it is. It's an ideal that journalism likes to hold up, but I don't. There's no such thing as pure objectivity. You can, and I think what people a lot of times forget is that journalists are storytellers. That is why a lot of us go into this business, because we love to find a story, an important story, and tell it in a compelling way.
Yeah.
And most journalists I know are just as interested in telling it in a compelling way that's going to get you to keep reading as they are in presenting the facts. And so marrying those two creates some challenges, because I know that if you're gonna spend the next 5 minutes listening to my feature story on NPR, I got to hook you from the beginning. And in order to do that, I have to choose very carefully sort of how I get you into this conversation and help you understand that here's the stakes. This is why this matters to you. This is why you need to spend the next 5 minutes listening to this conversation, this feature story that I've put together about this topic that you probably never thought of before in your life, but you really should. You're going to love this. So stick with me. And we do the same thing on BYU Radio. The first couple of minutes, I know I've got maybe 30 seconds, a minute to hook you so that you're going to be willing to sit with me for 20 minutes and hear this interview, which is an even bigger commitment. And so journalists think and care a lot about how to keep you engaged, how to get you to read, because we know you've got a lot of choices out there and a lot of other stuff going on, and you could flip the station or scroll on to the next thing without any effort on your part. And so we have to work hard at telling the story. And we also worry about presenting the story in as clear. I think fairness means more to me than objectivity. I want to be fair to the viewpoints in the story. I want to give you, I don't want to convince you. I think for me, trying to be objective means that I'm not coming into it with an agenda that I want you to buy into by the end of my conversation. I am coming at it as agnostically as I can to say, here's this side of the conversation. Here's this side of the issue. If my guest is going to say one thing, I'm going to push back so you can see what the other side is. And hopefully by the end, you've at least thought about something in a way you hadn't thought about it before. I mean, that I think the greatest thing that journalists can do these days, because everybody has an opinion. And if you're one of these people, I mean, we like to hear information that jives with what we agree with. And so my greatest goal, I feel like I've really achieved something if I can get somebody who only ever spends time thinking about the world from their little bubble perspective and listens to other people in their Facebook feed and other TV, networks that agree with their worldview. If I can get them to at least for a moment think, oh, so that's why people oppose this issue. Or, now I never thought of that. That's a good point. If I was in that position, I might feel differently about this issue. Then I've succeeded in objectivity, which is basically to try and help you understand that there's never just one clear view. There are always multiple viewpoints.
So with creating a story, then, you're trying to get their attention right off the bat, right? You have about 30 seconds to make sure they're hooked. What do you feel? how do you present information in such a way that they get hooked without creating the story or creating a perception of the story that doesn't actually exist?
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's a good point, and it's a tricky balance. If you think about all of the like the movies that we love, right?
Yeah.
There are certain kind of storytelling tropes and archetypes that are basically the same in all storytelling. Like there's got to be some fundamental to hook you on something. You've got to feel like something's at stake and that you identify in some way with whatever is at stake. And so with some topics it's a lot harder than others. Like some topics almost anybody can relate to, but sometimes we're going to talk about something that I just plain think is fascinating, but that doesn't really have a lot to do with your own life, And those can be a little bit trickier. But I think kind of more broadly, one of the things that people that's easy to slip into is to be sensational. This is the thing that, that healthcare could be dying, or you're going to, this is going to kill your kids. Or if you don't listen right now, I mean, just think of the way clickbait tries to get you to click through on these stories on Facebook. Like, she never knew her daughter was this, and it blew her mind, right?
Yeah,
or
Yeah,
and then you click on it, and it's like not that big of a deal,
Yeah.
And this is true. Even I was thinking about this earlier because a lot of people complain about how media is so negative, and it's true. There is actually a documented bias for negative news in a lot of types of reporting, especially most recently the Harvard Schornstein Center did a survey of the first first 100 days, I think it was, of press coverage of President Trump, and found that that the only clear bias that the media had, like major outlets they looked at, was a bias for negative news as opposed to positive news when it came to reporting on President Trump.
Yeah.
Like that is a clear bias that journalism has, and I think sometimes it's because in order to hook people on the issue, like we have to, that one way to do that is to kind of paint this pretty dire picture of how, of how things are going, or how, I mean, if you think about stories about healthcare access in certain communities, like they're never going to start with the story about how the people in rural Kansas are super healthy and have all this family, the story of the family that has everything. They're going to start with the story of the tragedy of the person who has a daughter who's dying of cancer and she can't get the medicine that she needs. Like that, there is, like, the stakes are higher when there is when life hangs in the balance, or when peace and prosperity hang in the balance.
Yeah.
And so that biases us toward a more negative type report, just fundamentally. I mean, I think journalism is it's a very, very powerful tool. I think it's a sacred trust because we have the capability to get ideas and information out there in a way that most other people don't. And social media is definitely changing that and blogging and podcasting, like everybody can now. But I mean, there are certain outlets that still have the ability to change the conversation. That is undeniable. And I hate to keep talking about like what's going on in Washington, but you see examples of this where some sort of report. I mean, it's like. Well, this has always been the case, whether it's Watergate or even going back further or on Contra or whatever it is, there's going to be reporting that can actually bring about a shift in conversation. It can cause investigations to start. It can cause, that, and that's an important power. So clearly journalism can shape national opinion. It can at least shape what's going on in the halls of power. I think that's for sure. I think it doesn't necessarily have the power on the national level to shape the way people across the country feel about their elected officials or how they're going to behave. I certainly think, and I know we're hearing this from teachers and parents, that if kids are aware of how President Trump talks about people and what he tweets, that certainly does send a message. Like certain individuals, but I feel like the same influence they're getting from their favorite musician, if they see, and probably even more so, if they see their favorite pop star behaving a certain way on Instagram or smack talking somebody in a certain way, Like that also is affecting, maybe even more so than the way President Trump talks about Democrats, affecting the way they feel like they should behave and how they should communicate. So again, and the only role journalism has in all of that is that we're reporting on it. Like we just make sure that you don't miss the fact that Justin Bieber talked about this or that President Trump said this. Like that, so we're the conduit for that. And maybe, I think it would be great if we stopped being the conduit for that and just if you want to know how President Trump talks on Twitter, go look at it yourself. If you want to know how your favorite pop star acts, go look at it yourself. We're not going to make a big thing of it. I think that would be really nice. I don't think it's ever going to happen. So, so maybe that's the way we contribute is we just sort of make sure people know that.
Yeah, you're kind of the mirror of society. You're like, this is what's going on, but you're not trying to drive it.
And we're also, to your point, that's a good, we're not, but we're also not mirroring all of the, you're not going to see some front page story about this, really nice way that these two rival pop stars talked to each other. That doesn't usually, again, tension sells. Yeah. Conflict sells. Yeah.
So my last question is, how can people listen to your radio show? How can they, tune in?
Well, that's an easy question that I won't have to take nearly as much time to answer. Satellite radio, if you have it in your car, or if you have a receiver, you have to have the subscription, obviously, to Sirius XM. We're on channel 143. And my show is Top of Mind. It comes on from 3 to 5 p.m. Mountain Time every day, Monday through Saturday, actually. And you can also stream it live on byuradio.org at that time as well. But we also on the website we podcast, so you can go to any of your podcast places and look for Top of Mind and you'll find it and you can download the show. And we have an app. You should check out BYU Radio's app for smartphone, Android, Apple. You can listen live or you can listen on demand, but byuradio.org is kind of the place you can find all that out if you can't remember it.
Well, great. Thank you so much for being my guest today. I seriously opened my eyes, and I really appreciate the real fairness that you do in journalism. If you're listening to this, I really mean it. Go to Top of Mind. It's a fantastic place to really hear actual stories, I don't want to say truth, but there's real facts there, and there really is perspective that you can obtain at Top of Mind. Thank you so much for being on the show.
That's very nice of you. Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Life is living, look profound.